Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pirate Pod from Arrington Capital. Super excited to have Francisco join us today from Tanssi. Today's a really special day for the Tanssi team. They are celebrating the close of a new round of funding. Huge congrats to the team. We're going to dig in on that a little bit further. We're also going to talk about why Tanssi Appchains are changing the game and, controversial take, they might be better than L2s or Rollups. We'll dive into use cases. We'll talk about the upcoming incentivized testnet, and we're going to talk about the DOT system overall. But first, as with all of our podcasts, I want to start by putting a spotlight on our founder, Francisco. Francisco, can you take a few minutes to introduce yourself, share a little bit of the journey that led you to Tanssi?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Francisco. I am one of the co-founders of Tanssi and the CEO of Moondax Labs, the development company responsible for building Tanssi. So yeah, just a little bit about myself. So I started working in the Web2 industry as most of us did. Right out of college, I joined a pretty big company. I pretty much hated that, so I knew I didn't want to do that anymore. And I left Milan, the city I was living at the time, and I went to do a master's in Berlin, since there was a pretty hot startup scene there. And yeah, after doing my master's, I joined a tech startup in Hamburg. So that was a quite cool experience. And during that time, I kind of met, after a couple of years of working there, I met Derek Liu, who is the founder of Moonbeam. And yeah, we spoke for a while, and was immediately struck by the vision he had about a project he was building at the time called Moonbeam. So yeah, I joined the core team of Moonbeam, helping with ecosystem development and growth. And yeah, there was no looking back from there, right? I thought the Moonbeam experience was amazing, and then from Moonbeam, that kind of ultimately led to me co-founding Tanssi. Yeah.
Got it. So Moonbeam was your first step into Web3.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. I think it's a great segue. I want to talk about the Polkadot ecosystem. And before I get there, you entering into Web3 and Moonbeam being your first sort of move there, and then still being involved in a much more interesting and different way with the DOT ecosystem. What's your take on the Polkadot ecosystem, where it was when you first joined Moonbeam and where it is today?
Yeah. So I mean, we've been building in Polkadot for a long time at this point, right? When we started Moonbeam, I mean, at that time, it was for us, we had this thesis that the future of Web3 was going to be multi-chain, right? Like, obviously, you talk about this right now, it's like so obvious, right? There's so many chains now, but back in the day, it was really only Ethereum, right? So it wasn't that obvious that there were going to be many different chains, different ecosystems. But I think Derek, I mean, the founder of Moonbeam, he was pretty clear on that, right? So we started looking at ecosystems that were built with native interoperability in mind, right? Because then when you have a bunch of chains, the key questions to address become, how are these chains going to speak to each other and communicate with each other? So Polkadot at the time is one of the few ecosystems that had this thesis in mind, right, of interoperability, shared security. And so we were very drawn to that from the beginning. And with Moonbeam, we just saw that, while Polkadot was very advanced in the technology that it had built, it was still missing kind of an Ethereum environment, right? Something that developers would be familiar with when building on Polkadot. That's ultimately what led to Moonbeam. I think, in crypto, there's a lot of narratives, right? So at that time, Polkadot was very hot. Since then, there's been a lot of different ecosystems that have come up. I think Polkadot, still one of the few ecosystems that keeps these like principles of Web3 that doesn't compromise on them. It's really uncompromising on decentralization, on security, which for us are really the values that's what Web3 represents to us, right? So this is why we're big fans of the Polkadot ecosystem. And but yeah, I can get more into details as to like how that has evolved, right? Like Polkadot in general is very advanced technology. I think it's way ahead of its time. You can see that from different ecosystems. The way that like the space is converging towards, a lot of these architectures that you see today are kind of analogous to what Polkadot has already built, right? What we realized pretty early on is that while Polkadot is very advanced and powerful in the tech that it proposes, it's still complicated, right? It's very complex to the developer to build on it. And that's ultimately what led to Tanssi, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And now Polkadot is going through a pretty yeah, pretty interesting evolution in terms of its architecture, which I'm sure we'll get into as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's impressive to see, and I don't think people realize like how much of this has been going on for so long. And you're right, like they do adhere to sort of the principles of Web3 that we're all striving for. With everything that Tanssi is doing right now, delivery, partnerships, fundraise today, you're becoming a larger player in the overall Polkadot ecosystem. Talk more about what Tansi's doing and I think it comes down to growth and more. But tell us a little about what Tansi's doing there.
Yeah, for sure. So when the whole idea for Tansy started when we were in Moonbeam, right? Because, as a team, Moonbeam was essentially a layer one built within the Polkadot ecosystem. It was kind of an Ethereum environment that we built. I mean, in layman's terms, it was simply Ethereum on Polkadot, right? And throughout the experience of building Moonbeam, we experienced firsthand as a team just how difficult it is to build a layer one, right? You have to take care. There's a lot of like infrastructural responsibilities that you have to take care of as a team, right? Ranging from having to bootstrap a validator set, finding out how to incentivize them. Then you launch the chain and you realize how much maintenance and like infrastructure management goes into. You realize you need things like wallets, block explorers, indexers, RPC endpoints, bridges, oracles. So there's so many variables involved with the deployment process that ultimately resulted in a time to market of like 12 plus months, right? So in general, we thought the developer experience wasn't good, right? So then we started speaking to teams, right? We started speaking to teams building layer one, like Polkadot, Cosmos, Avalanche subsets. And after having dozens of conversations, pretty much every team that we spoke to could relate to the issues that we went through. So that's when we saw, okay, there's a real problem to solve. In parallel, the app chain or the layer one space have been growing significantly, and that's really when we decided to go all in on Tanssi. And at the end of the day, Tanssi is an app chain infrastructure protocol, right? So the goal of the protocol is to just make it a lot easier for developers to deploy their own layer ones. So we do this by providing a series of permissionless services. The most important one is block production, right? So you can kind of think of Tanssi as a layer one to help deploy other layer ones. And we do that by, Tansi's layer one is essentially producing blocks on behalf of these other layer ones that launch through Tanssi. So you can kind of think of it as a shared and decentralized execution environment for block production as a service. And then we're working with a lot of these providers, the tooling, right? The tools like wallets, block explorers, oracles, RPC endpoints. The idea being to integrate those tools within the developer experience of Tanssi. So that when a developer launches their chain through Tanssi, they have all of these kind of infrastructural components accounted for, right? They don't have to go out and deal with all these things. We're kind of abstracting away the infrastructure side of things so that the developer can focus on just the application that they want to build, right? So overarching goal is really to cut the time to market, the resources, the energy required to launch an app chain from months to minutes. That's the whole idea with Tanssi.
Does dot 2.0, what impact does that have for Tanssi or for the dot ecosystem in general? Just a quick note on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, Tanssi was originally conceived with like the 2.0 vision, right? Because Gavin would have been talking about, at the time, well, 2.0 encompasses a bunch of things, but at the time, he talked a lot about parent threads. And parent threads, at the time, it was a very futuristic concept where right now, when you build a chain, you kind of have to produce blocks every X amount of seconds, right? But a lot of teams, you don't necessarily need you don't need all that like throughput for your application, right? In the app chain space, it's often that like teams launch the app chain and a lot of the blocks might be empty, right? And you don't have like an overwhelming amount of demand. And that's like capital inefficient, right? You're kind of paying a validator set, a full chain's worth of validators to produce blocks for you and secure the network, whereas the blocks might not be full. So you're spending a lot of money. So the concept of parent threads, and now they're called on-demand chains, is that, chains will only need to produce blocks on demand, right? As they need, right? When there's a block to be produced, they produce them. And if not, they're kind of like the block production yields are idle. So it's a lot more capital efficient for teams. Tanssi was originally thought with this concept. We just didn't know when that was going to shift to production, right? So we started with development with the current kind of parachain model. And as soon as like the 2.0 ships, hopefully it ships before we ship on mainnet, we're going to incorporate that. It's basically creating kind of different economic models to purchase block space, right? The on-demand model is something similar to a spot economic model where you're purchasing things in the present day, right? And if you see that you're getting traction, you're producing blocks all the time, it makes more sense to go for kind of like a reserve model, right? Where you're reserving block space longer term. And it's going to be a lot more flexible, a lot more capital efficient. It's going to lower the barrier of entry for a lot of teams. And Tanssi wants to kind of plug itself in there and just make it a lot easier to launch, right? Because now even if it's on demand, we still need to bootstrap block production nodes, right? So Tanssi will kind of automate that stuff for it.
Yeah. How important is it that a dot is as decentralized as it is when you think about the work that Tansi's doing?
Yeah, I think decentralization is, ironically, it's not like that sexy of a topic, right? In Web3, like a lot of people right now are more focused on, throughput or TVL, and these are kind of like the more sexy kind of KPIs. For us, like it was very clear from early on, we were not going to compromise on decentralization and security. And these are things that like Polkadot takes very seriously, right? So in today's space, it's really about trade-offs, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about Rollups later on. I know there's a lot of projects out there that say, no, we're optimized for everything, right? We're decentralized, we have a bunch of scalability, we're not, all these things. And I tend to take that with a pinch of salt. I think everything inherently has trade-offs in Web3 today. So we're optimized for security and decentralization and resilience, right? Interoperability, customizability. And these are all kind of properties that are uniquely enabled by Polkadot's architecture. And a lot of those things are very difficult to replicate. So I think Tanssi has a lot of competitive advantages from having leveraged the Polkadot architecture that I'm sure we'll get into.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to dive into that, but before we move off that, just one more quick thing related to it. How do you think about how Tanssi might connect outside the Polkadot ecosystem, right? And what would that mean for the dot ecosystem? What does that technically open up that doesn't exist now? Can you talk a little bit about, yes, you're dot native, totally with you on all of the amazing things that the dot ecosystem does, but what does it mean for Tanssi to be able to bridge some of those things externally from that ecosystem?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And honestly, we love Polkadot. Like our roots are in Polkadot. Our team is very experienced with Substrate, or it was recently renamed to Polkadot SDK. But I don't consider like Tanssi a Polkadot only project, right? Like to connect Polkadot to other networks, just to answer that part of the question, I think this is arguably one of the biggest trade-offs that developers have to make when they build an app chain. When a developer deploys smart contracts on something like Ethereum or Moonbeam or whatever EVM environment might be, one of the biggest advantages there is that every contract deployed to that specific EVM benefits from kind of native composability, right? When you build your own app chain, there's this like non-trivial question or problem to solve, like how am I going to connect to other ecosystem, right? And this is really not an easy problem to solve. Getting established bridges to connect to your chain is not easy, right? Like Wormhole, the Axelars of the world, Layer 0, Hyperlane. It's not easy to get their attention to integrate your chain in your early stage team. You're not going to build a bridge yourself. It's incredibly difficult. So with Tanssi, the way we plan to connect every Tanssi app chain to Ethereum and other networks is through this concept called Moonbeam Routeless Liquidity. So any Tanssi chain that launches can connect back to Moonbeam through XCM. XCM is this kind of native communication language for Polkadot chain. And given that Moonbeam already has connection to like Wormhole, Axelar, Layer 0, all these teams will kind of get an indirect or secondary connection to these bridges through XCM and Moonbeam, right? So this is a pretty powerful concept that any app chain that launches through Tanssi can get like out of the box bridging and connectivity to Ethereum and all these networks. That's uniquely enabled by the architecture of Polkadot and because of its interoperability, right? Which would otherwise be very difficult to do. That's kind of like to kind of answer the interoperability question for Tanssi chains. And then, the team is actively investigating how we can leverage Substrate in other ecosystems. So we're already trying to explore viable ways to incorporate Tansi's tech stack or Tansi's offering to Ethereum, right? And trying to merge both worlds between Polkadot and Ethereum. I think that's going to be longer term. That's going to be like the biggest focus of the team.
And just while you're on this, I know we're going to talk about use cases in the ecosystem. I want to hold a little bit, but at a super high level, are the use cases that you're seeing and the traction that you're getting from the Tanssi ecosystem, are those net new to the dot ecosystem? Are they migrating from other areas? Or are they dot native?
Yeah, it's a mix of everything, right? We're getting a lot of external teams, right? There's a lot of like smart contract developers that were previously held back from being able to deploy Appchains just because of how difficult it is from an infrastructure side of things. Now they can come to Tanssi, they can launch an EVM. We have these templates, right, where they're kind of pre-packaged Appchains where you can launch it in a couple of clicks. So smart developers will just launch like the EVM template that we offer so that they have their own EVM environment, and they're launching like their own EVM layer ones, right? A lot of them are coming from Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche. There's many native teams from the Polkadot ecosystem that they just don't want to deal with all the hassle of the infrastructure management, so they come to Tanssi as well. So we're seeing traction from some different directions.
Okay, great. All right, let's dive in a little bit more. Let's start off with a controversial take that Appchains, despite their complexity that has to date been difficult and complicated to build within, are technically better than Rollups and L2s. I know you're solving some of those complexities, but can we talk, let's take the complexity situation off, Francisco, and just talk about your thoughts on Appchains being better than Rollups and L2s.
Yeah, sure. This is a controversial topic for many. And just to clarify, like I know that there's a lot of Rollup as a service providers that use the term Appchain. So for us, like Appchains mean layer ones, right? Like for me, it's like layer ones versus layer twos. It's difficult to say like which one's better. It really goes back to what I was saying before, right? That it's about trade-offs. It's really what is important to the developer. Because when you're choosing to build a layer one versus a layer two, there are like inherent trade-offs that go into that decision. For us, there's very clear trade-offs that for us we were already decided about, right? Like centralization is arguably one of the biggest ones. So like traditionally with L2s or Rollups, there tends to be just like a centralized sequencer that is responsible for relaying all the blocks to set along Ethereum mainnet. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with centralization. It tends to lead to more throughput. But for us, this is like a non-starter to begin with, right? Because centralization, if you want to build something centralized for us, that's already like Web 2, right? So decentralization is the core of Web 3, so we weren't willing to compromise on that. And with centralized sequencers, there's several issues, right? There's like single points of failure, there's potential for censorship. You risk like downtime if that single sequencer goes down. The sequencer has a lot of like power, right? So they can decide which transactions go in and which don't. On the alt stack, for example, fault proofs aren't available yet. So if something bad happens on like an alt-based rollup, they're kind of relying on the team to decide whether to roll back the block or not. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if a development team is looking to build permissionless protocols, it's just not a good fit for a rollup, right? Because it's kind of at odds with the centralized components that rollups present.
Yeah.
I think cost is another big one. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
What do you think it means? Talk about cost, but what do you think it means for the future of how new stuff is built? Right? Do Appchains eventually overtake Rollups and L2s as that becomes more easier?
Yeah, no. I think like speaking in binary terms is probably not correct. I think there's space for both worlds, right? Some use cases won't care that it's centralized. Other use cases need decentralization, right? By definition. So I think there's a world for both, right? It depends on the use case. Other differences are like finality. Finality on optimistic rollups are they're pretty bad, right? Like it takes like 30 minutes on average for a transaction to be considered finalized on the rollup. Whereas, on an L1 through Tanssi, finality is like between 6 and 12 seconds. So that's significant, right? Especially as developers start to like build cross-chain applications. What we're starting to see is developers kind of deploy an instance of their protocol on many different chains, and they have to pick a hub. If you want to pick that hub that is responsible for settling messages and transactions, if you have poor finality properties, that's not good, right? You're imposing longer and longer waiting periods on the end user. And when you combine cross-chain use cases with poor finality, the problem is that cross-chain tends to increase latency, right? Because you're introducing different consensus mechanisms to one application. So when you combine increased latency with poor finality, that's like a bad combination. Cost is another big one. I think cost efficiency is going to be arguably one of the biggest determining factors of where developers want to build. ZK rollups are expensive, right? The ZK computation, at least today, it's quite expensive to operate. Optimistic rollups, it depends. I know Ethereum just had this upgrade that made it a lot cheaper, and there's things like Celestia, but they come with trade-offs, right? Again, Celestia introduces a different consensus mechanism separate to Ethereum, so there's more engineering complexity associated with it. I think this is one of the reasons why we're starting with the relay chain of Polkadot, because the relay chain currently provides, I can't remember, I mean, it obviously fluctuates because of the price volatility, but it's close to like $10 billion worth of security and stake value, right? With over like 400 validators securing the network. So it's an extremely high grade security environment that Tanssi is going to be able to offer at a fraction of the cost of Ethereum, right? I think Ethereum is just going to be more and more expensive to use as gas prices increase, as hundreds and potentially thousands of rollups start settling on it. So I think this is a significant competitive advantage for Tanssi to be able to offer this very high grade security that's very difficult to replicate at a fraction of the cost. Customization is another big one, right? Usually these rollups as service providers, they tend to provide like EVM only deployments, which is fine. We do that as well. But for some use cases, EVM is not efficient, right? Storage, for example, just doesn't work on EVM. Substrate is extremely modular and customizable. There's a lot of ecosystems using Substrate today, right? Like Near, AltLayer, Cardano, there's others, Aldeo, right? So it's a very powerful tech stack that's becoming more and more adopted because of these unique properties that it offers. And interoperability is a huge one as well, right? Composability and interoperability with rollups is definitely a challenge today. Whereas ecosystems like Cosmos and Polkadot were kind of built with composability in mind, right? So again, it just comes to these trade-offs where for us, Substrate enables us to deploy layer ones with very unique properties that optimize for security, decentralization, interoperability, cost efficiency. And I think a lot of those things are difficult to replicate after the fact, right? You have to kind of build with those concepts in mind from day one in order for them to work properly. So yeah, that would be my take.
Super helpful, Francisco. Shifting a little bit, no matter what choices people make when they're building, the heart of your business, the heart of Tansi's business has always been about making deployment easier. You're maniacally focused on making the lives of developers easier. Can you share a little bit more about that being your mission and how that guides you in everything you do? From driving dev traction to what you're providing to them, how you're interacting with them. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that developer experience is indeed at the core of what we're trying to do. Like, and it's not always easy, right? Because when you don't want to compromise on decentralization, like decentralization tends to increase like just complexity, and it's always easier to just do something centralized, right? Like, so that's kind of the challenge that we have ahead of us is like, how do we create like a great developer experience without compromising on these principles that are very important to us? But our take is like, yeah, even if the technology is superior and like, I don't know, you could be building the next rocket ship to Mars or whatever, like it is difficult to use, developers won't care, right? Like if it takes months to potentially years to deploy a layer one, developers just, the number of development teams that are willing to go through that process that is extremely painful and difficult, they're just not going to do it, right? They're going to go somewhere else. And that's, I mean, Substrate and Cosmos SDK, like the Polkadot SDK and the Cosmos SDK have both made it dramatically easier to build chains, but like the developer experience is still lacking, right? So this is really kind of an area that we saw an opportunity to capitalize on is, Polkadot and Substrate have built this great technology, but there are things that are lacking, right? Like the developer experience is not entirely there yet. So we thought that it was going to be a good opportunity to capitalize on that tech and enable the developer experience for developers to launch in like minutes, right? So, and that's not to say that teams won't fail, right? I think in my opinion, building a successful ecosystem, there's going to be a bunch of failure, a bunch of teams that don't make it, but that's not necessarily the point, right? The point is Tanssi being able to bring in a new wave of developers, having that top of the funnel be dramatically increased, right? Because if you only have 10 teams that are willing to go through the process, you'll be lucky if like one or two are successful. But if you make it so easy that like that leads to adoption, hundreds of teams come to building your ecosystem, and then the chances of finding these higher quality teams is increased dramatically, right? So yeah, for us, like facilitating that deployment process is everything. We always think of things through that lens.
Yeah, and you've had a ton of traction, especially I know the announcements that went out today had a lot of great visuals on sort of the ecosystem and adoption that you had. Can you talk quickly about the Elastic announcement? I think that falls into sort of making things easier for devs as well.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting projects. I'm pretty excited by Elastic. It's kind of there's a lot of like next generation projects that are leveraging kind of this new wave of tech and in Web3. Elastic is basically building like a a block space marketplace. So you mentioned Polkadot 2.0 before. Now Polkadot is shifting away from this like kind of auction model that used to exist. Teams will be able to purchase what they're calling core time on demand. So Polkadot is becoming becoming kind of like a decentralized AWS of sorts, where developers are going to be able to tap into very secure block space on demand. The last thing is basically building a marketplace for that, right? So the developer's saying, if you've purchased block space, that'll be kind of categorized as an NFT, and you can sell that NFT to other developers that need your block space. And it's highly complementary to Tanssi, right? Because even when you purchase block space, you're still going to need like block production nodes to execute that block space. So we're looking into collaboration with Elastic so that when somebody purchases block space on their marketplace, it's automatically executed through Tanssi's like block production protocol, right? Because that's what Tanssi does. We're producing blocks on demand, right? So that's kind of a very complementary thing that makes the developer experience even better. Yeah.
All right, we could spend a lot more time talking about use cases in your ecosystem. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that. We can do a whole nother 2 hours on it someday. But hot topic on real world assets. We had the Superstate team on here on a recent episode. We're big fans of what Centrifuge is doing. Can you talk about what you're seeing in real world assets? Is anyone using Tanssi for some of those items?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we're actually getting a bunch of traction with RWAs. I think we're coming to find that it makes a lot of sense for Appchains, having sovereign dedicated block space for your RWA platform. There's a bunch of teams. Kona is a great one, right? They're building BRX chain, so it's basically a short-term receivables platform. They're creating like a credit market for short-term receivables. So in Brazil, it's very popular for Web2 merchants to accept credit card payments. Those credit card payments take 30 days to process. So Kona essentially creates a marketplace so that those merchants can take those short-term receivables and use them as collateral. They can sell them to fintech companies. It's also very popular to accept like installment payments in Latin America. So they allow merchants to take those future installment payments and sell them at a discount to fintech companies. Those guys were previously building on like Polygon, and they love the idea of building.
I was gonna ask for like give us at a high level, like, or again, do they exist elsewhere and they're migrating over, or are they net new? What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, they were building on Polygon before. But when we pitched some Tanssi, they just loved the idea of building kind of BRX chain or Kona as their own environment, right? Because of the token utility that it drives. This is one of the biggest factors why people want to build kind of Appchains to begin with, is it just utilizing your token as the gas token so that you settle all these credit products and transactions in your own token.
Yeah.
The sovereignty involved with it. User experience is a lot better, right? Where you can guarantee a predictable gas market for your users. The customizability, right? You can kind of change the chain according to like the user experience that you want people to have. Whereas in a shared EVM environment, some things like there's trade-offs, right? Like if you want to build on Ethereum, you can. It's very straightforward. But if you want to modify certain things, you just can't because you're sharing all this block space with everybody else. So, apart from Kona, there's a bunch of others. Debt, they're building kind of commodity tokenization. Appchain is like a green assets tokenization platform. Excavate is real estate tokenization. Rotan, Caster. There's a bunch. There's also
Tanssi is becoming a pretty significant part of the RWA movement too.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of RWA projects building on Tanssi. There's a bunch of gaming.
Do you see them as more B2C or B2B companies coming and using Tanssi?
Some of them are B2B, some of them are B2C. Yeah.
Okay.
It depends on the specific use case within the RWA segment.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the raise? Congratulations, $6 million from a number of different Web3 funds across the space. Can you talk about raising money in this environment?
Yeah, no, it depends, right? Because like the first round we raised it last year, and it was really like the heart of the bear. We started this round again, left came pretty out as well as the bear. It was actually towards the end of the round now, like it became much easier, right? Like there's more capital, right? So towards the end of the round, a bunch of people were reaching out to me like, hey, can I invest? Blah, blah, blah. And it was already like we had already pretty much closed the round. So I would say now it's a lot easier. If you're a founder or you're looking to raise capital to start a project, now is the time like to strike while the iron is hot. And raising in the bear, I mean, honestly, I didn't mind the bear too much because now in the bull, it's very difficult to differentiate like kind of the bullshit, right? There's so many people now like claiming they're like whatever geniuses, and there's a lot of noise in the bull, whereas in the bear, it's a lot it's quieter, right? It's easier to kind of concentrate and find like the higher quality teams. It's definitely more difficult to raise there, but if you're a good team, and yeah, I think investors are able to identify the people that are going to stick it out, right? But definitely wasn't easy. But I think now it's a more favorable environment for sure.
What's it going to be used for, the raise? I know you've got a bunch of things coming out. Point us to a few different areas of what the capital is going to be deployed to.
Yeah, so I mean, mainly to accelerate the development of the protocol, right? We're looking to launch mainnet in Q3 of this year. We're scaling the team. So yeah, I think those are the two big things, and we have some big initiatives coming up. So we're going to be launching like an incentivized TestNet campaign, like a point campaign in the next month. So that's going to be, I think it's going to be quite an aggressive campaign to accelerate adoption even further. Where if you're a development team, you can apply to the builders track. It's oriented towards community as well. There's going to be a community track to help grow the community as much as possible, and then like a block production node track for people who want to get engaged to produce blocks. Yeah, so that's going to be running for several months leading up to the mainnet launch.
And the testnet, the incentivized testnet, is that open or coming?
It's coming. I mean, if you're a builder, that page is just open. It's going to be launching at end of next month.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. And then I don't think we asked at the beginning, Francisco, where does the name Tanssi come from?
Yeah, I mean, I need to come up with a better story for this to make it like sexy or something, but like, it's honestly surprisingly difficult to come up with a name for a network.
Is it going to be the Tanssi? Is it going to be the Tanssi token?
I think there might be times. Either times or for times. Times is a bit long. I was voting for Tanssi, but people are kind of just going for times. But yeah, the name, if it needs to pass many tests, right? Like Polkadot founders and the team need to like it. It needs to pass like the trademark or copyright infringement tests. Like the domain needs to be available. Initially, it was called Moondance, but I don't know. People were like, "No, it's too similar to Moonbeam," and Benefit it's a separate project, right? So people are going to associate it with it. We like the dance aesthetic because at the end of the day, Tanssi is kind of an orchestration layer it's coordinating change, right? So we realized, okay, we like dance. I went to ChatGPT for many hours, and then Tanssi, and then means like to dance in many foreign languages like Russian, Finnish, and German. It's like Tanzan. So yeah, we just stuck with Tanssi, and that's kind of the story.
Awesome, fantastic. All right, Francisco, anything else you wanted to say before we head down here?
No. I mean, thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure. And if anybody wants to engage, we're pretty responsive, right? So you can phone or tell back or reach out to me on Telegram, Appchains, Agosti. We're going to join the incentivized testnet campaign, and if you guys are looking to build, we're pretty supportive as a team. So yeah, just reach out if this talk interested you. And yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Kelly.
Thank you, Francisco, for joining the Pirate Pod.